Approach notes and enclosures. That exact part is the part that brings jazz in the sound of a phrase. Movement inside of the element always goes from the approach notes to the target part. And there are three ways of approaching the target part: diatonically, chromatically, and combine these two previous methods. Relative enclosures. Relative enclosures are enclosures that contains the same number of notes with the same pitch. The only difference between two relative enclosures is the order of notes that they consist of. Enclosure substitution. It's important to know that you can always substitute enclosure to its relative enclosure, leaving target parts of the element on its places. That way you can change the sound of a whole phrase, but it still will be combined with the same pitches. It's very important to remember. Every element contains at least one target part. Between two target parts of two different elements could be only approach notes or enclosures that belongs to the target part of the second element. The element always ends with the target part. After a target part has been played, the element is considered completed. Approach note or enclosure that goes after target part always belongs to a second element. You should never mix it in your mind because it leads to incorrect construction of a phrase. Anytime you play target part of an element, you have to establish the dividing line and immediately recognizing the following sounds, the beginning of the next element. This line runs between the end of the first element and the beginning of the second. At first glance, things that I'm talking about seem to be self-evident that are not worth to be mentioned. But you will see starting practicing how easy for a musical mind to get lost while playing. From the very first steps, you have to remember that musicians in the beginning have a habit to incorrectly combine elements inside of the space of their musical mind. It happens because when we play, all of the sounds are merging into a one stream of sound. But if you always practice remembering these rules, then you will see how this flow of sound is appearing have a clear boundaries correctly dividing one element from another. It allows not to lose concentration and understanding during playing, and even create phrases right at the moment of playing. Approach note or enclosure can't be placed after the target part. It always goes before target part. Bars that belong to one chord of the progression can contain an approach notes or enclosures to the target parts of the second chord, but it can never contain the target part of the second chord. Every time you reach the target part of the element, remember that in that exact moment you determine the order of the movement in the phrase, descending or ascending. The extension of enclosure or additional tones in enclosure. This method is based on repeating one of the tones of enclosure in order to extend it, moving element from one position to another. Double enclosure or enclosure to enclosure. This method is based on adding enclosure or approach note to approach note or enclosure that you have already built. In that case, add that approach note or enclosure in relation to the approach note or enclosure that was already there, becomes a target part. Rhythmical position of the element. Determination of position of the element is based on dividing a bar into a group of 4 beats. A color and the flow of a sound of the element of jazz improvisation always depends on position of the first and the last sounds of its target part. If the target part consists of only one scale degree, then position of the element will be determined by position of this exact scale degree. The first and the last tones of the target part of the element could be only in 2 positions, in a strong position or in a weak position. First and third beats are called strong beats. Sounds that are placed on these beats are called being in a strong position. Second and fourth beats are called weak beats. Sounds that are placed on these beats are called being in a weak position. If the first and the last sounds of the target part are both located right on the strong or weak beats, then they are called being in a fully strong or fully weak position.